Space had a way of making people feel small. Not in the poetic way the recruitment posters like to show, with bright stars and sleek ships and proud explorers looking toward the horizon of infinity. The real kind of small. The kind that settled slowly into your bones when you realized that the universe was older than imagination and larger than fear, and that most of it did not know or care that you existed. The survey ship HFY Horizon drifted quietly through that kind of space. The region was called the Outer Veil, though the name was more tradition than geography. It sat far beyond the dense traffic lanes of the inner systems where commerce moved in glowing streams of ships and navigation beacons lit the dark like distant cities. Out here there were no cities. No trade stations. No patrol routes. Just ancient stars burning faintly and the long silence between them. Commander Lena Kovacs liked the silence. Most captains didn't. They preferred busy sectors where something always appeared on the scanners and every hour brought new coordinates or reports or problems that needed solving. But Lena had spent nearly 20 years in the void, and she had learned that quiet space often held the most interesting secrets. Secrets did not like crowded places. They liked emptiness. And the outer veil was very empty. The horizon had been mapping gravitational distortions for 3 days when the silence broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a faint chirp from the signal analysis console. Lieutenant Arjun Patel almost ignored it. He was halfway through a mug of reheated coffee and had been staring at a screen full of static for so long that every noise the system made had started to sound the same. The computers constantly adjusted filters, recalibrated antennas, and tested receivers. Small alerts were normal. But something about this one was different. It repeated. A soft tone. Then another. Patel frowned and leaned forward. "That's strange," he muttered. Across the bridge, Commander Kovacs glanced up from her tablet. "What is?" "Probably nothing," Patel said automatically. "Just some noise spike." He tapped a few commands. The signal analyzer opened a deeper scan. At first the screen showed nothing but the usual clutter of cosmic radiation, old pulsar echoes, and the faint electromagnetic hiss that filled every corner of the universe. Then the noise shifted. Very slightly. Like a whisper inside a storm. Patel straightened in his chair. "Commander!" Kovacs set her tablet down. That tone in his voice was not curiosity. It was the tone of someone who had just seen something that shouldn't exist. "What did you find?" she asked. Patel didn't answer right away. He was adjusting filters, isolating frequencies, stripping away layers of interference the way an archaeologist brushed sand from buried stone. The signal grew clearer. Not strong. Still faint. But definitely structured. "I'm picking up a transmission," Patel said slowly. Kovacs raised an eyebrow. "Out here?" The outer veil was thousands of light years from the nearest inhabited system. There should be nothing transmitting. "That's what I thought," Patel said. He ran the scan again. The signal repeated. A long burst. The pause. Then another burst. Over and over. Like a heartbeat. "It's old," Patel added. "How old?" "Hard to tell yet." Kovacs stood and walked toward the console. The rest of the bridge crew had already begun paying attention. Silence spread across the room as they watched the signal waveform crawl across the screen. "Can you decode it?" she asked. Patel activated the universal translator. The system processed the sound pattern, comparing it against tens of thousands of known languages and mathematical structures. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the translator began generating symbols. Not words yet. Just fragments. Patterns. The computer struggled with it. The signal was damaged, degraded by distance and time. But it was definitely language. "Someone is talking," Patel said quietly. Kovacs folded her arms. "In the outer veil." He nodded slowly. "And they've been talking for a very long time." "How long?" Patel opened a deeper scan. The navigation computer triangulated the origin point of the transmission. Coordinates appeared on the display. Then another line of data blinked into existence. Patel stared at it. Twice. Then he exhaled softly. "Commander!" "Yes. You should probably see this." She leaned closer to the screen. "What am I looking at?" Patel pointed to the timestamp analysis. The computer had finished calculating the signal's age. The number was blinking red. Not because it was dangerous, but because the system had flagged it as statistically unlikely. How old is it? Kovacs asked. Patel swallowed. Approximately. He paused. 112 years. The bridge went silent. Not the comfortable silence of deep space. A different kind. The kind that comes when people realize they have just stumbled onto something enormous. Kovacs stared at the screen. A distress call? She asked quietly. Patel replayed the signal again. The faint bursts echoed through the speakers. Broken. Desperate. Persistent. Still repeating after more than a century. He nodded slowly. I think someone out there. Another burst of signal filled the room. Has been calling for help. The signal did not sound like a cry for help at first. It sounded like noise. A soft clicking rhythm buried under layers of static and radiation, the kind of background chaos that filled every corner of the universe. Old stars whispered. Pulsars crackled. Magnetic storms screamed across empty systems. Most transmissions died in that noise. This one had survived. Lieutenant Patel ran the signal through a deeper filter stack. The waveform sharpened slightly, rising out of the static like the faint outline of a mountain appearing through fog. It's repeating, he said. Commander Kovacs leaned over the console. How often? Patel expanded the time scale. The signal stretched across the screen in long, evenly spaced bursts. Every 3 minutes, he said. Exactly. Automated broadcast? Looks like it. He adjusted the gain again. The speakers filled with a series of strange sounds. Clicks. Soft humming tones. Rising pulses that almost sounded musical. The universal translator struggled for several seconds, comparing the patterns against known linguistic structures. Then, slowly, the first fragments of meaning began to appear on the display. The computer translated cautiously, filling gaps where the signal had degraded. Patel read the text aloud. This. Vale Prime. He paused. Another line formed. We are still here. The bridge went completely silent. Patel continued. We are requesting assistance. The next line appeared more slowly. Our star is failing. The translator hesitated, recalculating context before producing the next phrase. Our people are dying. No one spoke. Even the ship's engines seemed quieter. Patel replayed the transmission again. The message repeated exactly the same way. Same words. Same pauses. Same desperate rhythm. Kovacs crossed her arms. Can you trace the origin? Patel nodded and opened the navigation interface. The computer began triangulating the signal's direction using the ship's antenna array. It took several seconds before a coordinate marker appeared on the star map. The point was deep inside the outer veil, far beyond any registered system. That can't be right, one of the navigation officers muttered. Patel zoomed out. The nearest inhabited system was nearly 4,000 light-years away. No relay stations, he said quietly. No trade routes. No colonies. Nothing. Kovacs studied the map. And yet someone built a transmitter powerful enough to reach us. Patel didn't answer. Instead, he ran a new scan across the signal structure. Something odd appeared in the data. The transmission was not one message. It was many. Hundreds. Stacked together. Like layers of sediment buried under time. Patel frowned. Commander, I think this beacon has been recording messages. What kind of messages? He isolated the oldest segment. The signal became clearer. A different voice filled the speakers. Still alien. Still made of clicks and tones. But calmer. Measured. The translator worked quickly. This is Dr. Cellari of the Vale Prime Stellar Institute. Patel felt a chill run down his spine. Our sun is entering an accelerated decay phase. This is not a natural process. The message continued. We believe an ancient stellar destabilization weapon was triggered within our star's core. Another pause. We estimate planetary collapse within 2 centuries. Kovacs leaned closer. They knew what was happening. Patel nodded slowly. The recording continued. We are transmitting our research to the galactic confluence and requesting emergency assistance. The signal ended. Another recording began immediately after. 20 years later, the difference in tone was obvious. The voice sounded strained. This is the Vale Prime Council. Our star's deterioration has accelerated. Outer colonies have frozen. Agricultural zones are failing. We again request assistance from the confluence. Another pause. The next message came 30 years later. This voice trembled. We are losing cities. Our population has fallen below 9 million. Please, if anyone receives this signal, respond. The messages kept going, each one a little more desperate than the last. Scientists, leaders, engineers, then, eventually, ordinary people. Patel played one at random. A soft voice filled the speakers. The translator hesitated for several seconds before speaking. My name is Lethera. I am a teacher. Our schools are closing because the children cannot stay warm. My students asked me if someone will come. A long silence followed. I told them yes. Another message. A deeper voice. I am sending this recording so someone will know we existed. The translator struggled with the final phrase. So someone will remember us. Patel stopped the playback. No one moved. Commander Kovacs stared at the dark screen. How many? She asked quietly. Patel checked the archive. Thousands. How long? He hesitated. Then he opened the timestamp analysis. The computer sorted the transmissions in chronological order. The oldest message appeared at the top of the list. Patel swallowed. The first recording was transmitted. He looked back at the number. 112 years ago. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Over a century, a civilization had been calling into space, begging for help, and no one had answered. Patel slowly scrolled to the newest message in the archive. The timestamp read 3 months ago. He played it. The voice was young, barely more than a child. We are still sending this signal. The pause. We know it may never reach anyone. Another pause. But we will keep trying. The translator hesitated before producing the final line. If you can hear us. The voice faltered. Please come. The recording ended. Silence returned to the bridge. Commander Kovacs looked at the blinking signal indicator. The transmitter on Vale Prime was still broadcasting. Still repeating the message. After 112 years. Patel leaned back in his chair. His voice was barely above a whisper. They never stopped calling. The signal continued to repeat. Every 3 minutes. Like a clock that refused to stop. The faint transmission pulsed through the speakers again, the same desperate message echoing across a century of silence. This is Vale Prime. We are still here. Our star is failing. Please respond. No one spoke. Commander Lena Kovacs stood beside the signal console with her arms folded, staring at the waveforms slowly crawling across the screen. 112 years, she said quietly. Patel nodded. Yes, Commander. That means the first broadcast was sent before humanity even built the deep-range survey network. Correct. Kovacs looked toward the main star map. The glowing point marking Vale Prime sat alone in the vast emptiness of the outer veil. But the emptiness was misleading. The galaxy was not empty. Not really. It was crowded with civilizations. Trade routes. Observation networks. Relay stations. Thousands of listening posts. Which meant one thing. Someone should have heard the signal long before the horizon ever arrived. Kovacs turned back to Patel. Run a spectrum search across the old relay archives. He frowned. You think someone already logged it? I think it would be impossible not to. Patel opened the Deep Archive database. The ship's AI connected to the Long-Range Galactic Data Network and began comparing the signal frequency with historical scans. The process took less than 10 seconds. Then results appeared. Patel stared at the screen. Then again. Commander. Yes. We have a problem. Kovacs stepped closer. What kind of problem? Patel pointed to the results. The frequency used by the Vale Prime beacon had appeared in multiple survey records over the past century. Some of them were decades old. One entry dated back 93 years. Another from 71 years ago. Then one from 52 years ago. The same signal. The same message. Detected again and again. By different ships. Different civilizations. Across different regions of space. But none of the records contained a response. No rescue missions. No investigation logs. Nothing. Just notes. Brief observations. Signal detected. Unidentified transmission. Low priority. Patel felt a slow heaviness settle in his chest. They heard it, he said. Kovacs didn't answer immediately. She scrolled through the records herself. A merchant convoy. A scientific probe. 2 patrol fleets. A long-range observatory belonging to the galactic confluence. All of them had detected the signal. All of them had logged it. None of them had done anything. Why? One of the bridge officers asked quietly. No one had an answer. Kovacs looked at the oldest entry again. It had been logged by a confluence monitoring station 93 years earlier. The note attached to it was short. Distress transmission detected from unregistered system. Civilization status unknown. Resource assessment, non-strategic. Recommended action, none. Patel exhaled slowly. They wrote them off. The bridge lights hummed softly overhead. Somewhere in the background the ship's engines vibrated through the deck. The signal repeated again. This is Vale Prime. We are still here. Kovacs leaned against the console. For 112 years, she said, they kept broadcasting. Patel nodded. And the galaxy kept ignoring them. No one spoke for a long moment. Across the bridge the stars outside the viewport burned quietly, ancient and distant. So many civilizations. So much technology. And yet a world had been dying for more than a century while its people begged for help. Finally Kovacs straightened. Plot a course. Patel blinked. Commander. Set a trajectory for Vale Prime. He hesitated. It's 11 days at full burn. That's fine. And we don't know what we'll find. I know. Patel looked at her. You want to investigate? Kovacs watched the blinking signal indicator for a moment. The faint voice echoed from the speakers again. If you can hear us, please come. She made her decision. Yes, she said quietly. We're going. Patel entered the coordinates. The navigation system recalculated the ship's route. Engines began warming for a long-distance burn. Kovacs turned toward the communications console. Prepare a transmission to Earth Command. Patel raised an eyebrow. What should it say? Kovacs thought for a moment. Then she spoke. 6 words. Patel opened the message channel. Ready. Kovacs looked once more at the repeating signal from Vale Prime. A civilization that had refused to stop calling. Then she dictated the message. We found them. The pause. What do we do? Patel sent the transmission. The signal shot away from the horizon, racing across the stars toward Earth at the speed of light. Behind it, the ship's engines ignited. The horizon turned slowly in the dark, and began its 11-day journey toward a dying sun and a world that had been waiting 112 years for someone to answer. The message from the ESV horizon arrived at Earth 9 hours later. It appeared first inside the secure network of United Earth Command, where thousands of transmissions passed through every day. Most of them were routine. Cargo reports, navigation updates, survey data. This message was only 6 words long. We found them. What do we do? Normally a message that short would not attract much attention. But it carried an attachment. A large one. The system flagged it automatically. Audio files. Hundreds of them. The recordings from Vale Prime. At 4:12 Geneva time, the message appeared on the desk of Director Elena Ramirez, the current head of Earth's Deep Survey Command. Ramirez was halfway through her morning coffee when the alert arrived. She opened the message without much expectation. Most discoveries from the survey fleets were interesting but rarely urgent. New asteroid belts, strange radiation pockets, occasionally a previously unknown star system. Then she opened the audio archive. The first recording played. This is Vale Prime. We are still here. Our star is failing. Ramirez slowly set her coffee down. She listened to the entire message. Then she opened the next one. And the next. For nearly 15 minutes she sat in complete silence while the voices from Vale Prime filled her office. Scientists explaining the collapse of their star. Officials requesting help from the galactic confluence. Citizens describing cities going dark and crops freezing. Then the later recordings. Parents. Teachers. Children. Voices that had grown older, weaker, more desperate over time. Finally she reached the most recent recording. The young voice. If you can hear us, please come. The message ended. Ramirez leaned back in her chair. For a long moment she simply stared at the ceiling. Then she opened a secure channel. Connect me to the Secretary General. The call was routed immediately. Within minutes the recordings were moving through Earth's highest levels of government. By 7:30, the entire United Earth Assembly had received the archive. By 9 o'clock, the Scientific Council had begun analyzing the stellar data attached to the signal. By 11:15, someone leaked the recordings to the public network. No one ever admitted who did it. But within minutes the files were spreading across human space. Titan, Europa, the lunar universities, orbital habitats, deep space stations. Billions of people began hearing the voices from Vale Prime. At first the reaction was quiet. People listened. They heard the calm scientific reports from the early years. Then the increasingly urgent pleas. Then the ordinary voices of people who had slowly realized that no one was coming. The recordings were not dramatic. There was no screaming, no chaos. Just voices. Steady. Tired. Still asking. One particular recording spread faster than the rest. It had been made 70 years into the crisis. A woman's voice spoke softly into the transmitter. My daughter asked me today if anyone will answer us. A long pause followed. I told her yes. Another pause. I hope that was not a lie. Across Earth and its colonies, people listened to that message. And something changed. At Olympus Station on Mars, a 17-year-old student named Daniela Vasquez was watching the recordings on a small personal broadcast channel she ran mostly for friends. Her channel normally had a few thousand viewers. That afternoon she opened a live stream. She didn't add commentary. She didn't speak about politics or strategy. She simply began reading the transcripts out loud. One message at a time. Her voice was steady. The way someone reads a story they want others to hear clearly. This is Dr. Cellari of the Vale Prime Stellar Institute. Hours passed. She kept reading. Her viewer count climbed. 10,000. 100,000. A million. She didn't stop. When she reached the final message, her voice was barely above a whisper. If you can hear us, please come. Daniela looked into the camera. Her eyes were red from reading for so long. Then she held up a small handwritten sign. 3 words. They are alive. Below it she had written another question. What are we going to do? By the next morning, more than 2 billion people had watched the broadcast. Across human space, the same conversation was happening everywhere. In kitchens. On cargo docks. Inside university labs. In government chambers. People listened to the recordings. And then they asked the same question. What do we do? The United Earth Assembly Chamber in Geneva had been built to hold 600 representatives. On the day of the emergency session, every seat was filled. Observers crowded the upper galleries. Journalists packed the press balconies. Outside the building, thousands of people stood in the plaza watching the proceedings on enormous public screens. But inside the chamber, the mood was not dramatic. It was quiet, heavy. Because everyone in that room had already heard the recordings from Vale Prime. The voices of a civilization that had been calling into the dark for 112 years. Secretary General Amira Dion stood at the central podium. She was not a tall woman, but when she spoke the entire chamber listened. Members of the Assembly, she said, her voice steady, you have all reviewed the material transmitted by the survey vessel Horizon. Behind her, the chamber screens displayed the star system map of Vale Prime. A small blue-green world orbiting a dim orange star. Our scientific advisors confirmed the distress reports, she continued. The star of Vale Prime is undergoing accelerated fusion collapse, likely triggered by an ancient stellar weapon or destabilization device. A new image appeared. The star. Sickly. The estimated time until total stellar failure is approximately 30 years. Murmurs rippled across the chamber. 30 years might sound like a long time. But in stellar physics, it was nothing. Dion continued. The population of Vale Prime was once estimated at over 12 million. Another screen appeared. The most recent census transmission. Current surviving population is approximately 4 million. Silence spread across the chamber again. 4 million people. Waiting. Calling for help. For over a century. Dion folded her hands. The question before us is simple. She paused. Do we respond? The floor opened for debate. The first speaker was Representative Marcus Ionescu, leader of the Outer Colonies Coalition. He stood slowly and walked to the podium. No one in this room doubts the tragedy of Vale Prime, he began carefully. But we must also consider reality. He gestured toward the star map. That system lies far beyond our logistical network. Any large-scale rescue operation would require enormous resources. Another image appeared. Projected mission costs. Fuel. Engineering equipment. Fleet mobilization. The stellar stabilization problem alone may be beyond our current capabilities, Ionescu said. Several representatives nodded. Earth and its colonies still face their own challenges. Infrastructure, expansion, defense. We cannot commit to every crisis in the galaxy. He stepped back from the podium. The chamber murmured again. Next came Dr. Keiko Tanaka, head of the Human Stellar Physics Council. Her voice was calm. The science is extremely difficult, she said plainly. Stabilizing a dying star would require energy systems and resonance arrays larger than anything humanity has ever constructed. She paused. However, the room quieted again. Difficult does not mean impossible. A small ripple of conversation moved through the chamber. Tanaka returned to her seat. More speakers followed. Some argued for caution. Some argued for limited aid. A few suggested sending observers but avoiding direct intervention. The debate lasted for hours. Outside, the crowd in the plaza grew larger. Many of them held signs. Some displayed a phrase that had begun spreading across human networks. We heard them. Finally, near the end of the session, one more representative rose. Her name was Hana Kaito, a young delegate from the Pacific Collective. She walked slowly to the podium. For a moment she didn't speak. Instead, she looked around the chamber. 600 representatives. Leaders of an entire civilization. Then she began. I listened to the recordings from Vale Prime last night, she said quietly. Her voice carried easily through the chamber. I listened to the scientists who first discovered their star was dying. She paused. I listened to the council members who asked for help. Another pause. And I listened to the ordinary people who came later. Her eyes moved across the room. Teachers. Parents. Children. The chamber was completely silent now. They kept calling, Kaito said softly. For 112 years. She let that number hang in the air. 112 years. Then she asked a simple question. Exactly how long were they supposed to wait? No one answered. Kaito continued. We now know the galactic confluence heard their signal. The chamber screens displayed the archive records. Survey ships. Monitoring stations. Observatories. All detecting the same distress call. And they did nothing. Her voice sharpened slightly. They ran the calculations. They measured the costs. They decided those 4 million lives were not strategically valuable. Kaito leaned forward on the podium. And now they are advising us to do the same. A few representatives shifted uncomfortably. Kaito shook her head. I don't think we want to follow that example. Outside the chamber, the crowd erupted in applause. Inside, the silence deepened. Kaito finished with one final sentence. They called into the dark for 112 years, she said. And now we are the first ones who can answer. She stepped away from the podium. The vote began the next afternoon. Every representative had one question in front of them. Should humanity intervene at Vale Prime? The voting panel lit up across the chamber. Green. Abstain. One by one the lights appeared. Green. 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 Across the chamber the pattern became clear. When the final count appeared on the central screen, even the most optimistic supporters were surprised. Votes in favor, 283. Votes opposed, 7. Abstentions, 10. The resolution passed. Secretary-General Dion returned to the podium. She read the final declaration aloud. The people of Earth and all human settlements hereby commit their full effort to the preservation of the Vale Prime civilization. Her voice remained calm. We will not measure the value of their lives against the cost of helping them. Another pause. We will go to them. And we will not leave until they are safe. Outside the chamber, the crowd began cheering. Across human space, billions of people watched the vote. And in the quiet darkness of the outer veil, the ESV horizon continued its journey toward a dying star. The vote had barely finished when the first ships began moving. No one issued a formal call for volunteers. No recruitment broadcasts were transmitted. No grand speeches were made across the networks asking citizens to help. People simply started doing things. At Titan Station, a cargo mechanic named Brett Harlow watched the assembly vote during his lunch break. The broadcast ended. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he opened his banking account. Everything he had saved in 22 years of work sat there. Not a fortune. Just enough for a small apartment and a quiet retirement. He transferred it all into the newly created Vale Prime Relief Fund. In the message field he wrote only one sentence. I heard them. Within 6 hours the fund had received donations from 12 million people. Across Earth's moon, a group of graduate students in the Lunar Stellar Physics Institute had not slept for 2 days. The recordings from Vale Prime played quietly in the background while they worked. Equations covered the walls. Whiteboards. Glass screens. Even the floor. They were attempting something their professors had always described as theoretical fantasy. A method to restart collapsing stellar fusion. When their department director arrived that morning, he expected to shut the project down. Instead he looked at the calculations for several minutes. Then he quietly rolled up his sleeves and joined them. On Mars, Daniela Vasquez ended her long broadcast. Her voice had nearly disappeared from reading the messages for hours. When the vote passed, she opened the camera again. Millions of viewers were still watching. She didn't make a speech. She simply smiled weakly and said 3 words. They're going. Across human space, cargo pilots began filing unusual flight plans. The requests appeared in navigation control systems everywhere. Destination, Outer Veil. Reason, relief convoy. Some of the ships were massive transport carriers capable of hauling entire factory modules. Others were tiny private vessels with barely enough cargo space for emergency supplies. One pilot from Europa Station filed a plan that contained only a single crate of medical equipment. The automated system flagged the request as inefficient. The pilot approved it anyway. Within 48 hours, the first convoy assembly point formed at Transit Gate Sigma, the last major jump hub before the outer veil. Ships arrived constantly. Freighters, medical ships, scientific research vessels, mobile fabrication platforms, construction barges carrying raw alloys and reactor cores. Every hour the traffic control grid had to expand the holding pattern further to fit them all. The convoy coordinator, Vice Admiral Nadia Reyes, stood inside the control tower watching the traffic feeds scroll across the display. She had spent 30 years commanding naval fleets. She had overseen military operations involving hundreds of ships. But she had never seen anything like this. None of these ships were here because they had been ordered. They had come because they chose to. An aide approached her. Admiral, we've passed 300 vessels. Reyes nodded. Keep assigning formation positions. Some of the civilian pilots are refusing to wait for full escort authorization. Then give them escort authorization. The aide hesitated. Even the private ones? Reyes looked at the screen again. Ships were still arriving. Tiny courier craft. Independent traders. Long-haul mining transports. One ship registration caught her eye. A personal transport vessel from Titan Station. Pilot, Brett Harlow. Cargo capacity, minimal. Declared cargo, food supplies. The system flagged it again. Admiral, the aide said carefully, this ship is barely spaceworthy for deep-range travel. Reyes studied the data for a moment. Then she gave a small shrug. Assign him a position in the formation. But he's going either way, Reyes said calmly. Might as well keep him where we can see him. The convoy kept growing. By the end of the second day, more than 600 ships floated in orbit around Transit Gate Sigma. The assembly looked less like a fleet and more like a small artificial galaxy. Engines warming. Navigation lights blinking. Cargo modules locking into place. Inside those ships were thousands of engineers. Doctors. Technicians. Scientists. Farmers. Construction crews. People who had never met the inhabitants of Vale Prime. People who had never even heard of them until 3 days ago. And yet they were all preparing to cross thousands of light years to help them. At the front of the formation, Admiral Reyes opened a channel to the entire convoy. Her voice spread across 600 ships. This is Convoy Command. The chatter inside the fleet quieted instantly. Our destination is Vale Prime. She paused. Distance, 4,000 light years. Another pause. This will be the largest civilian rescue mission in human history. No cheers came over the channel. No applause. Just silence. Everyone already knew what this meant. Reyes continued. We are not a war fleet. We are not here for profit. Her voice softened slightly. We are here because someone called for help. Outside the viewport, the ships began igniting their engines one by one. Lines of blue light stretched across the darkness. Reyes finished the transmission. Convoy, prepare for departure. Hundreds of engines flared brighter. The massive fleet slowly aligned toward the empty darkness of the outer veil. Then, together, they began the long journey toward a dying star and 4 million people who had never stopped calling. The star of Vale Prime was dying. That was the first thing Commander Lena Kovacs noticed when the ESV Horizon dropped out of transit. The system appeared slowly on the forward screens as the ship's sensors adjusted to normal space. At first it was only a dim glow against the darkness, a faint orange light surrounded by scattered fragments of ice and rock. Then the image sharpened. The star was wrong. Not violently unstable, not exploding or collapsing into chaos. The color was dull, like a candle flame that had been burning too long without fresh air. Its light barely reached the outer edges of the system. Radiation levels are extremely low, Patel said quietly from the sensor station. How low? Kovacs asked. 30% below normal output for a star of this class. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. A star that weak could not sustain life on nearby planets for long. Show me Vale Prime, Kovacs said. The navigation computer zoomed in. The planet appeared on the screen. For a moment, no one spoke. Because Vale Prime was beautiful. Oceans covered much of its surface, deep blue under the faint orange sunlight. Vast green continents stretched across the equatorial regions, dotted with bright clusters that sensors identified as cities. But the temperature readings told a darker story. Surface heat levels were dropping. Storm systems were forming where warm currents collided with spreading cold zones. Ice sheets were beginning to creep southward from the polar regions. The planet was still alive. But it was losing the fight. Patel looked at the readings again. They've managed to hold on longer than expected. How? One of the officers asked. Probably orbital mirrors, atmospheric processors, anything they could build to trap heat. Kovacs nodded slowly. A civilization trying to outlast a dying star. She turned toward the communications console. Open every frequency they used in the distress recordings. Patel's fingers moved across the controls. Channels open. Kovacs leaned forward slightly. This is Commander Lena Kovacs of the Earth Survey Vessel Horizon. Her voice traveled across the system in a wide broadcast. We received your signal. She paused. We are here. The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent. Everyone watched the signal indicator. Nothing happened. Seconds passed. 10, 15. Then the speakers crackled. A burst of the same clicking, humming language filled the bridge. The translator activated almost instantly. The voice that came through sounded breathless. Unsteady. We hear you. The words trembled slightly. Please repeat. Kovacs answered immediately. This is the human vessel Horizon. We received your signal. We came to help. The reply came back faster this time. The voice sounded overwhelmed. Are you real? The bridge crew exchanged glances. Kovacs felt something tighten in her chest. Yes, she said softly. We are real. Another voice joined the channel. Then another. Multiple signals suddenly appeared across the communications panel. Different transmitters. Different locations across the planet. All speaking at once. The translators struggled to keep up. You answered. You actually came. After all this time? One voice cut through the others. Calmer. Older. Silence. The transmissions stopped instantly. Then the older voice spoke again. This is Iravel, director of the Vale Prime Stellar Institute. A short pause followed. We believed our signal was no longer reaching anyone. Kovacs leaned closer to the console. It reached us. Iravel's voice returned, quieter now. How long has it been since the first broadcast? Kovacs glanced at Patel. 112 years. There was no response for several seconds. Then the alien scientist spoke again. The translators struggled slightly with the emotional tone. We stopped expecting anyone to answer after the first 50. Silence filled the bridge again. Iravel continued. You say you came to help? Yes, Kovacs said. Another pause. We must confirm something, Iravel said carefully. Are you alone? Kovacs allowed herself a small smile. No. She turned toward Patel. Send the convoy update. Patel transmitted the data packet. Seconds later, the orbital sensors of Vale Prime began detecting new signals. First 1. Then 10. Then hundreds. Iravel's voice returned, trembling slightly. We are detecting a large number of approaching vessels. Kovacs looked out through the forward viewport. Far beyond the outer edge of the system, faint points of blue light were beginning to appear. The first wave of the human convoy entering normal space. There are more of us coming, Kovacs said. Iravel did not respond immediately. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded different. Something softer. Something the translator struggled to interpret. We have been waiting for a very long time. Kovacs watched the convoy lights growing brighter in the distance. Yes, she said quietly. We know. The convoy arrived over the next 8 days. Ship by ship, the dark space around Vale Prime filled with human vessels. Freighters the size of mountains slid into orbit beside small medical craft. Construction barges deployed long mechanical arms and began releasing prefabricated modules into carefully calculated positions. From the surface of Vale Prime, the sky began to change. Where once there had only been the weak glow of their dying sun, now dozens, then hundreds, of tiny moving lights drifted across the darkness like a new constellation being built in real time. The Valkyrie watched from their cities. At first cautiously, then with growing disbelief. The humans did not arrive with ceremony. They arrived with tools. Within hours of the convoy's arrival, orbital construction had already begun. Massive platforms unfolded from cargo ships, locking themselves together into frameworks that stretched kilometers across space. Energy relays, reactors, and magnetic stabilizers were assembled piece by piece. Inside the Horizon, Commander Kovacs watched the activity through the main viewport. She had commanded exploration missions for 2 decades, but she had never seen engineers move this fast. Construction teams report Phase 1 array deployment is ahead of schedule, Patel said from the console. Kovacs nodded. Send the data to Iravel's lab. Down on the surface of Vale Prime, the largest surviving research facility buzzed with activity. The building had once been part of the planet's central university district. Now it served as the headquarters for the remaining members of the Valkyrie Stellar Physics Division. Iravel stood at the main console in the underground laboratory. For 31 years she had studied the collapse of her star. For 31 years every calculation had ended the same way. Failure. Extinction. Now the lab was filled with strangers. Humans. They moved through the room quickly, carrying data tablets and diagnostic equipment, speaking to one another in fast bursts of unfamiliar language. At first their behavior had been unsettling. Valari scientists approached problems carefully. Methodically. Humans did not. They argued loudly across the room. They scribbled equations across entire walls. They built test models while still debating the theory. More than once Iravel had heard them describe a solution as close enough, which had nearly caused several Valari engineers to faint. And yet the results spoke for themselves. Within 2 days the humans had identified something Iravel had missed. Not a mistake. Constant. A tiny error in the stellar resonance models caused by an outdated gravitational interaction coefficient. The correction was almost laughably small. But when the new number was applied to the equations, the simulations changed dramatically. Iravel stared at the updated projection on the screen. The star stabilization curve rose sharply instead of collapsing. For the first time in 3 decades, the math suggested survival was possible. Across the room, a thin human physicist with messy hair leaned back in his chair. Dr. Thomas Reinhold had been studying Iravel's research for nearly 6 hours without speaking. Finally he pointed at the equation on the display. "That constant," he said. Iravel looked at him. "Yes. You were right about the resonance cascade." She blinked. "I was almost right." Reinhold shook his head. "No. You solved the problem years ago." He tapped the screen. "You were just missing one number." Iravel stared at the projection again. Her bioluminescent skin patches shifted color slowly, glowing brighter than they had in decades. A deep golden light spread across the patterns on her exoskeleton. In Valari biology, the color represented overwhelming relief. "We can stabilize the star," she said quietly. Reinhold nodded. "If we build the relay arrays." Iravel looked up toward the ceiling. Through kilometers of rock and atmosphere, the human fleet orbited her dying sun. "How long?" she asked. Reinhold considered the question. 2 weeks. Iravel exhaled slowly. "For 31 years I believed the problem was unsolvable." Reinhold shrugged. "Most problems look that way until someone changes the numbers." Back in orbit, the construction platforms continued expanding. The project was enormous. 47 stellar relay arrays positioned at precise gravitational points around the star. Each one larger than an entire city. Together they would create a synchronized resonance wave through the stellar core, forcing the collapsing fusion layers to reignite. If the calculations were wrong, the result could be catastrophic. But if they were correct, the star would live. On the surface of Vale Prime, citizens began gathering outside the research center each evening. They watched the sky as the arrays slowly took shape around their sun. Many of them had never seen so many ships. Many of them had never believed help would come at all. Now the heavens themselves were changing. Iravel stood on the balcony outside the laboratory one night, watching the distant construction lights. Commander Kovacs joined her quietly. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally Iravel said softly, "Your species moves very quickly." Kovacs smiled slightly. "We've had practice." Iravel turned her glowing eyes toward the sky. "For over a century we prepared ourselves for extinction." She paused. "Now we must prepare for survival." Kovacs followed her gaze toward the growing network of arrays around the star. "Good," she said, "because we're not done yet." The warning came early in the morning. Commander Kovacs was halfway through reviewing construction reports when the alert tone echoed across the horizon's bridge. It wasn't the normal quiet chime of engineering updates or navigation adjustments. It was sharp, urgent. Patel's voice followed immediately. Multiple contacts emerging from transit. Kovacs turned toward the tactical display. "How many?" Patel zoomed the sensor feed. The screen filled with new signals appearing at the edge of the Vale Prime system. The computer identified them quickly. 14 vessels, Patel said. Kovacs studied the shapes forming on the display. Long, narrow warships with heavy armor plating and distinct forward weapon arrays. She recognized the design immediately. Crethal Dominion, she said quietly. The name spread across the bridge like a cold wind. The Crethal were not officially enemies of humanity, but they were not friends either. Their empire stretched across a large section of the outer veil, expanding slowly through intimidation and economic pressure. Where the Crethal appeared, smaller civilizations often disappeared. Formation. Kovacs asked. Patel zoomed the tactical grid. Standard strike pattern. Kovacs nodded slowly. They came prepared. Outside the viewport, the first Crethal warships dropped out of transit burn. Their engines glowed a deep crimson as they formed a tight line at the far edge of the system. They didn't approach. They didn't fire. They simply stopped. Watching. Within seconds, Admiral Nadia Reyes' voice filled every channel across the human convoy. All ships, this is convoy command. Her tone was calm. Controlled. We have visitors. Hundreds of human vessels shifted slightly in orbit, maintaining their construction positions around the star. Reyes continued. No ship moves without authorization. No weapons are armed. Another pause. But we hold our position. On the surface of Vale Prime, the Valari observatories detected the new fleet immediately. Iravel watched the sensor feed from the research center. Those ships are not ours, one of the scientists said nervously. Iravel nodded. I know. In orbit, the Crethal fleet transmitted its first message. The signal arrived on every channel simultaneously. The voice that came through the translator sounded cold and perfectly controlled. This system is currently under review by the Crethal Dominion Authority. A holographic emblem appeared on the communication screens. The symbol of the Dominion. This star system lies within a strategic resource corridor. The voice continued without emotion. The presence of unauthorized foreign fleets constitutes a destabilizing factor. Kovacs folded her arms. Here it comes. The message continued. All non-Valari vessels are advised to withdraw immediately. Across the human convoy, engineers and construction crews continued working. Welding arcs flashed across the growing relay arrays. Cargo drones moved steadily between ships. No one stopped. On the horizon, Kovacs opened a direct channel. This is Commander Lena Kovacs of the Earth Survey Vessel Horizon. She kept her voice calm. The Valari civilization has requested our assistance. We are here to stabilize their star. A short pause followed. Then the Crethal commander replied. The Valari civilization is in terminal decline. The words landed heavily. Our analysts project full extinction within 30 standard years. Another pause. The Dominion intends to claim this system after the collapse. Patel whispered under his breath. They were waiting for them to die. Kovacs kept her voice steady. That is no longer happening. Silence stretched across the channel. Then the Crethal commander spoke again. You are interfering with Dominion resource acquisition. Kovacs leaned slightly closer to the microphone. This system belongs to the Valari. A longer silence followed. Across the system, the 14 warships remained perfectly still. Weapons systems remained cold. But their targeting sensors were active, watching every human ship. Finally, the Crethal commander asked one question. Will you withdraw? On the bridge of the horizon, every crew member waited for Kovacs' answer. She didn't hesitate. No. The reply came back instantly. Your fleet consists primarily of civilian vessels. Another pause. Medical ships. Construction platforms. Cargo transports. The implication hung in the air. They would be easy targets. Kovacs looked through the viewport. The relay arrays continued expanding around the dying star. Thousands of people were working out there. Engineers. Scientists. Pilots. Volunteers. She answered calmly. We know. Across the human convoy, Admiral Reyes opened a fleet-wide broadcast. Her voice echoed through every ship. Convoy status remains unchanged. Another pause. We stay. The Crethal fleet said nothing more. They simply remained at the edge of the system. Watching. Waiting. For 9 long days, the two fleets held their positions. The humans continued building. The Krethel continued observing, and the star of Vale Prime continued dying. Until the morning the arrays were finally ready. The morning of the ignition was quiet. Commander Lena Kovacs noticed that immediately. After 3 weeks of constant construction, endless arguments between engineers, sleepless nights, and the constant tension of the Krethel fleet watching from the edge of the system, everything had suddenly slowed. No alarms. No frantic radio chatter. Just quiet. Across the city of Thesavar, the largest surviving city on Vale Prime, people were standing outside. Valari filled the streets, the rooftops, the open plazas. They were all looking at the sky. Above them, their dying star burned a dull orange. Fading. Around it, 47 enormous relay arrays floated in perfect formation. Each one glowing faintly as power flowed through the network. Inside the planetary command center, the room was packed. Human engineers, Vari scientists, representatives from the smaller alien species that had quietly moved their ships beside the convoy during the standoff. Everyone had gathered to watch. At the central console stood Iravel. For 31 years she had studied the collapse of her star. For 31 years every calculation had ended the same way. Failure. Now she rested her hands on the ignition controls. Beside her stood Dr. Thomas Reinhold. For once, he wasn't talking. He had spent the entire morning checking and rechecking the equations. Finally, he looked at Iravel. "The math is correct," he said softly. Iravel nodded. Around them, the room had gone completely silent. Commander Kovacs stood near the back wall, watching the countdown clock appear on the main screen. Ignition sequence, 4 minutes 30 seconds. Outside the building, the city waited. Across the planet, millions of Valari looked toward the sky. Even the Krethel fleet remained where it was, watching the operation unfold. The countdown reached 1 minute. Iravel's bioluminescent skin patches glowed a deep amber. Valari physiology expressed emotion through light. At that moment her entire body shone like a lantern. 30 seconds. Across the system, every relay array synchronized its energy output. Reactor levels climbed. Power surged through the network. 10 seconds. Iravel looked at Reinhold one last time. He nodded once. 4, 3, 2, 1. Iravel pressed the ignition control. For 11 seconds nothing happened. The screens showed identical readings. The star remained the same dull orange. The relay arrays continued pumping energy into the stellar core. But the reaction did not start. Inside the command center, people stopped breathing. 11 seconds can feel like an eternity when the fate of a world depends on them. Then the sensors registered a change. Tiny. Almost invisible. A ripple across the star's outer surface. The stellar temperature began rising. Slowly at first. Then faster. On the main display, the fusion curve jumped upward. The dying reaction inside the star's core suddenly accelerated. The orange glow brightened. Across the city of Thesavar, the sunlight changed. It warmed. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Just slowly. The way a sunrise spreads across a horizon. But the difference was unmistakable. The light was stronger. Warmer. Alive. Inside the command center, someone gasped. Another person laughed. Then the room erupted into noise. Scientists shouted across the consoles. Engineers hugged each other. Iravel didn't move. She simply stared at the data streaming across the screens. The star was stabilizing. The resonance cascade had worked. Their sun was no longer dying. Reinhold gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You solved it," he said quietly. Iravel covered his hand with her own. Outside, the light of the star grew brighter. Across Vale Prime, the Vari people began glowing. Their bioluminescent bodies lit up the cities like millions of living lanterns. The color was gold. A color rarely seen in Valari society. It represented overwhelming relief. Commander Kovacs stepped outside the building. She wanted to see the sky with her own eyes. The sunlight felt different already. Warmer against her face. Behind her, someone approached quietly. She turned. An elderly Valari stood there. His exoskeleton was worn and faded with age. Iravel had mentioned him once. Thesak Morn. the oldest living citizen of Vale Prime. He had been alive when the first distress call was sent. For decades he had refused to meet the humans. He had been too afraid to hope again. Now he stood beside Kovacs, staring at the sky. The sunlight reflected across his body. His bioluminescent patches slowly brightened, brighter than any Kovacs had seen before. The old Valari turned toward her. For a moment he said nothing. Then he carefully placed one of his forearms across her shoulder. A gesture of deep respect in Valari culture. Kovacs remained still. Later she would learn what the gesture meant. You did not abandon us. High above the planet, the relay arrays slowly powered down. Their work was complete. The Krethal fleet lingered at the edge of the system for another hour. Then, without sending another message, the 14 warships turned and left. The dying star they had been waiting to claim now burned healthy and strong. The system belonged to the Valari again. In the months that followed, the story of Vale Prime spread across the galaxy. The Galactic Confluence was forced to formally recognize the Valari as a protected civilization. Diplomatic alliances shifted. Scientific journals filled with papers describing the first successful stellar relay ignition. But the most important change was quieter. Across hundreds of worlds, the word human began to mean something new. For centuries it had meant unpredictable, reckless. Now it carried another meaning. A phrase used by the ancient Suvari species described it best. Roughly translated, it meant the ones who answer. On the final night before the Horizon left Vale Prime orbit, Kovacs sat on the outer hull of the ship, watching the planet rotate slowly beneath her. The oceans reflected the stronger sunlight. The cities glowed softly. 4 million people were alive because someone had finally answered their call. She opened her personal log. They asked us why, she said quietly into the recorder. Why we came. Why we spent so much for strangers. She looked out toward the stars. I think the answer is simple. She paused. They called for help. Another pause. And we heard them. Kovacs closed the log. Behind her, the engines of the Horizon began warming for departure. Ahead of her, the star of Vale Prime burned bright and steady. A sun that had almost died. A sun that would now shine for billions of years. And somewhere in the vast archives of the galaxy, a record would remain. For 112 years, a civilization had called into the dark. Then humanity answered.